So creating messages means storing data in our Vuex store. Thus far, we only got our coaches module. Now, of course, we also need a module for requests because we also want to manage requests. So in the store modules folder under requests, I'll create an index.js file just as I did it in coaches. And I'll also create all the other files, mutations.js, getters.js, and actions.js. Again, it's up to you whether you want this layout or not, but I'll go for that, also to be in line with my coaches setup. Now in index.js here in the requests folder, we then export an object and we import that object from index.js in requests into our main store in this index.js file in the store folder. So here, just as we imported the coaches module, we can import the requests module from modules requests index.js and then simply add the requests key here in the modules object in our store and point at requests module. Now inside of this exported object, I will now also set namespace to true so that we use namespacing for this module as well, and we don't just merge it into the global state, into the global store, which we could do, but which I don't want to do here. And then we need to bring in our mutations and so on. But first of all, we need a state. We need a state in this module, and that state should manage one simple thing, our requests. So all the requests we know, and then every request will have a certain coach ID attached to it. And then later, if that coach ID matches our ID, that's a request we'll see. All the other requests will be invisible to us. So now that's our state, an array of requests. Now, of course, since we already are fetching data for a request in the contact coach component, we now need a mutation and an action for creating a new request. So let's start with the mutation here. There in mutations.js, we also export an object, and in here we can add a add request mutation, sounds like a fitting name, where we get our state, like in all mutations, and a payload, which in the end will hold the request data. And then we can simply reach out to state requests and push the payload onto this array, assuming that the payload already is the finished request as we want to add it. And that's then already it for the mutation. Now let's add an action. So here we export an object as well in the actions file, and we could name this action contact coach. Now we will get our context here and also probably a payload, because we need that data that was fetched from the form in the contact coach component. Then we can create a new request here, which can be an object where we can add a user email field, where we point at payload email, for example, assuming that the payload we get is an object with an email field, and add a message where we point at payload.message. But there's one more thing we need to add here, and that's the coach ID, because every request needs to be attached to a coach ID. So for that, I want to get the ID of the coach to whom this request was sent. And therefore here, I assume that this is also part of the incoming payload, the coach ID. And then we just want to add an ID to the request itself so that every request object has a new ID. And we can simply create a dummy ID for the moment by taking the current date and getting a string snapshot of it, so to say. And with that, we already got all we need. Now we can call context commit the add request mutation. That's the name I chose here in the mutations.js file. And then also pass on our payload, which for me here will just be this new request we're building here. And that should now add a new request to our requests state if this action is dispatched with the appropriate payload. So now it's up to us to dispatch this. So back in the contact coach component, here in submit form, we now want to reach out to this store and call dispatch. And then since our module is namespaced, it's the requests namespace we have to access, and therefore it's requests / contact coach here. Contact coach is our action name, requests is our namespace name. Now, of course, we need to add some data here, and that data should be this object which we're extracting here in our action. So we need a coach ID, an email, and a message field in our payload object. So therefore here, I want to create a new object which has an email field pointing at this email, a message field pointing at this message, and then one other important thing, the ID of the coach to whom this message is sent. And we can get this ID here because you have to keep in mind that when we contact a coach, this URL contains the coach ID. So therefore, since this is a child route, the contact coach component is a child route of coach detail, which has this ID parameter, we can extract that here as well. We could do it with props true, but to also see that other approach you learned, here in contact coach, I'll get the ID differently. I'll set my coach ID field here to this $send route and then ID, because that parameter holds the ID of the coach to whom this message is sent. And that should then dispatch this successfully. Now, last but not least, I then also want to navigate away from this page, so we can do this with this router and then replace maybe instead of push so that we can't go back to this page thereafter and go to /coaches. But it's up to you where and how you want to navigate. With that saved, we should now actually be able to send requests. So if we contact a coach here and we fill out this form, first of all, if it's invalid, we get an error message. But if I fill it out thereafter, we at least leave the page, but I get an unknown action, requests contact coach. Yes, because in the requests module, well, that's a nice object I'm exporting here, which I'm in the end importing into my store. But what's missing here? Well, the mutations and actions I defined in those separate files, I don't import and add them to my module here. And that's of course something we have to do. We have to import mutations from ./mutationsjs and import actions from ./actionsjs. And once that's done, we can add mutations using the JavaScript shorthand here and actions as key value pairs to this module object. And with that done, if I try to contact a coach, this is a test. Now we no longer get this. We also don't see the requests anywhere though. So as a next step, let's work on the requests page.